Hi, social studies students, it's Mrs. Blansett. We are here today for Notes 4, which covers FDR and the New Deal during the Great Depression. You'll find it on page 12 in your notes packet. And again, if you don't have your notes packet at home, you'll find resources on Google Classroom. Make sure you have something to write with and a highlighter. No big deal if you don't have a highlighter. You can always just underline. Just a reminder that after this set of notes, you'll be completing a homework assignment, which is due Friday, April 10th. It is in your packet, however, it must be completed electronically on Google Classroom to be turned in. All right. So when we last did a set of notes, notes 3, we talked about President Hoover, who you see in the lower right-hand corner. As the Great Depression sunk the United States economy and its people deeper and deeper, President Hoover felt strongly that we just needed to kind of pull up our bootstraps, and that whole idea of rugged individualism, that if Americans just worked hard enough, the economy would right itself. But that didn't actually happen. The United States economy fell deeper and deeper, and the American people really suffered because of it. Now, towards the end of his presidency, or his term, I should say, in 1932, he was doing some things. He helped the Congress begin a handful of programs to kind of try to stimulate the economy, but most Americans at that point said, you know what, it's too little, too late. They viewed him as kind of cold in the idea that there were so many helpless people in the United States who needed help and weren't getting it, at least not getting it in a timely manner. So when the election came up in November of 1932, Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt, who promised the American public a New Deal, he promised that he would try new things. He looked pretty good to the American public. So there you go. There's FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When the election took place, you can see the blue states are those that voted for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and the red states are those that voted for Hoover. So an overwhelming majority of Americans were ready for something different, to try a new approach. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, winning over their votes by relating to the idea of hardships. He was struck with polio when he was a younger man, and he was unable to walk without help after his illness. So in his inaugural speech, he said to the American public, "This nation asks for action, and action now. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." A very famous line from Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So his willingness to try new government programs gave Americans hope that we could get our country back on track in terms of our economy and getting people back to work and back into homes. So in your notes on page 12, go ahead and fill out for Franklin Roosevelt that he won the election of 1932 and promised to take action to help America out of the Great Depression. Now, we can't talk about Franklin Delano Roosevelt without talking about his wife. His wife, whose name is Eleanor, really served as her husband's eyes and his ears. Because of his polio and because of his paralysis, he really couldn't travel as easily as he would have liked to be able to get out there and listen to the American public. So Eleanor did it for him. She traveled all around the country, meeting Americans in large cities and small towns, listening to their experiences, and then she would go back and she would talk to her husband about what she had seen so he could have a better picture of what was going on in his country. So she really changes the role of the First Lady with her active involvement in politics, or at least taking a role in politics. So go ahead in your notes, page 12, for Eleanor Roosevelt, that she changed the role of First Lady by traveling the country taking on efforts to solve major issues. And really, since then, first ladies have each kind of had their own focus of work that they want to do while they're in the White House. Okay, so when President Roosevelt becomes president, when he's inaugurated in 1933, he immediately takes steps to try to boost confidence in the American public. So the first thing that he felt needed to be done was to tackle the bank crisis, where Americans were losing their money as banks were closing. So instead, he just closed all banks. Now, I know that seems odd, but by closing all of the banks, what he promised the American public is that if they saw a bank open, that the government had taken a look at it to make sure that it was sound and stable, and that they would only allow those to reopen that were sound and stable. So in your notes, find the box for boosting confidence. He called it a bank holiday, where he temporarily closed all banks and only allowed those stable banks to reopen. So Americans knew, again, if they saw a bank that was open, that the United States government was telling them this bank can be trusted. You can have confidence putting your money in, taking out loans, and using the bank for your business. So that was March 6th to March 9th. But on March 9th, not all banks reopened. It took a long time for them to go from bank to bank and to analyze them. All right, here's another something that Roosevelt did. He really utilized the technology of radio broadcasting to reach Americans right in their living rooms. Remember, most Americans at this point had a radio in their house. And so his first broadcast was March 12th, 1933. To talk to Americans about the bank holiday. He talked in very easy to understand language. He made it so that Americans felt like they were talking with the president, that he was sitting down in their living room right next to the fire and having a conversation with them. Now, what he did that day was so successful. Americans really appreciated being talked to by the president in such a almost personal way, that he continued to do that throughout his presidency. Whenever he felt the American public deserved to know something, he would get on the radio and he would talk to them about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks. I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days and why it was done and what the next steps are going to be.
All right, so you got to hear President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's voice as he made that very first broadcast on March 12th, 1933, to talk to Americans like they were on his level and like they deserved an explanation of why the banks were being closed, and Americans really appreciated that. So you have this definition here. Grab your highlighter and decide 2 or 3 phrases that are key to the definition and highlight them. So this term fireside chat became very synonymous with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. All right. One last thing, Roosevelt had campaigned with a promise of bringing a New Deal for Americans. And so when he got into office in 1933, he did not let Americans down. In fact, he began his New Deal by pushing a record 15 bills through Congress in his first 100 days in office. That is fast work. It was definitely a record. Congress and the president were working very closely together to come up with new laws and new ways to help Americans who were suffering through the Great Depression. So go ahead and grab your pencil and your notes, page 12. Pushed 15 bills through Congress, his first 100 days in office. Now, I love this political cartoon. I've seen it hundreds of times perhaps, but you have FDR there, who has a bag that looks like an old-fashioned doctor's bag that says New Deal Remedies. And then next to him, the maid, Congress, who's there to help him get those remedies passed through. And he says, of course, we may have to change remedies if we don't get results. And then you see, I don't know if you recognize him, in his pajamas and his slippers, sitting right there is Uncle Sam. And he's got all kinds of remedies sitting next to him with different acronyms like FACA and CWA, CCC. Those are all kinds of different programs that the United States government, along with the president, FDR, tried to pass in order to help Americans who were struggling during the Great Depression. So we're going to go ahead and talk about those in our next set of notes. All right, so this is the end of part 1. Let's go ahead and wrap up, and then we will see you tomorrow for part 2. Have a great day. Bye.